One of the things that frightened and baffled me about this service is I found that it was going to be a bit of an emotional roller coaster, going from joys to sorrows, from 90th birthday to an acknowledgement of how horribly many candles are already lit. But then I thought to myself, okay, it's an emotional roller coaster, so is addiction. For those involved and for those that love them. So I'm going to transition to a reading today. This reading comes from a section of the UUA, Unitarian Universalist Association website, where there is a section on addiction and recovery. And this is from the 12 Steps of Alcoholic Anonymous and Other Recovery Programs, but seen through a Unitarian Universalist humanist lens. As some of you know, or even if you don't, you may have realized that I chose the title of this sermon as a sort of a provocation. Because one of the things that Unitarian Universalists and others struggle with in 12-step recovery programs is how to define that power greater than ourselves. The second step is typically acknowledging a power greater than ourselves. In the original Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step model, that was seen as God. It was very highly religious-based. And over their history, both AA and NA have struggled with how to integrate other belief systems. And this is one great example. It's from our Unitarian Universalist website, and it recasts that second principle, or that second step. It says, "We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity." That's not going to happen. How are we doing now, Nadine? Am I still on? Sorry about that. The second step in this program reads, "We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That power is a part of each of us. It's our life source. It's our love, our heart, our spirit, our connectedness with all beings in the universe. It's that eternal part of us that we abandoned and disowned when we sought to obtain something outside ourselves that we thought would give us safety, contentment, love, and happiness. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood that word. The experience of life we are having now is the evidence of our power. By our separate and self-serving thoughts, feelings, and actions, we have unconsciously created it. Therefore, by mindfully choosing different thoughts, feelings, and actions in communion and cooperation with our life source, we can create something new, life-affirming, something joyful and beautiful. That's how humanists see the second step, and it's not a bad start for my reflection today. In our worship committee meeting a few months ago, Reverend Cynthia proposed that we might hold a service in support of our congregation's participation in Overdose Awareness Day, and we all agreed immediately. And then, for reasons that I'm not totally clear on, I volunteered. It's not really a joke. I volunteered, and I immediately regretted doing so. Immediately. We literally hung up the Zoom, and I was like, why did you do that? And the reason is because this topic, although I have a personal connection, and that's why my hand went up, is not an easy one for me and for anyone, I don't think. I volunteered because I had a connection to that issue of overdose and awareness, and I felt called to it. But then I realized that as well as being a worthwhile thing to do, it would also be very painful. I knew that in order to share my experiences with addiction and overdose, I would need some help and some support. And in that spirit, I'm going to begin my reflection by asking you all a question. If you're comfortable doing so, please again raise your hand if you've been affected directly or indirectly by the opioid epidemic. If you've been impacted by the struggle of a family member, a friend, a coworker, someone you care for, or if you've just lost somebody to overdose. Just look around for just a second. I needed that to be able to continue to say what I want to say. Thank you. So I'm not very special with my connection to this issue. It's not really surprising given the numbers. Last year alone, over 1,700 people in New Jersey lost their lives to overdose. And even though that does represent about a 10% decrease from the previous year statewide, there's actually been an increase in 3 counties. Anybody know which ones there were? This county, as well as Cape May, and I forget the third one. So, although New Jersey seems to be headed in the right direction, the progress is uneven, and the success or failure of these programs is not always linked to what you would think. I heard someone say Camden County. Camden's doing great in terms of reductions, because you go where the fire is when you have the fire hose. So despite my reluctance, and despite how sad it is that I'm nowhere near the only person in this congregation with a personal connection to this issue, when I think of those 35 flags that we're going to plant, I knew I had to volunteer. And when I think about the 4 more flags that we'll plant this year than we planted last year, that's to say Somerset County has gone from 31 deaths to 35. I think about 2 phone calls in my life. One phone call that I made and one that I received. And that's what I want to talk about. Both of those phone calls represented the beginning of my personal connection to someone who was dealing with addiction. The first phone call that I made was from my brother's house. I don't know if he's here. Phone call I made was from my brother's house. I was there because my brother was having what I think he would agree, and he has agreed to let me talk about it, by the way. He was having what I think he would say was one of the worst days of his life. I showed up at his house that day because he was having the sort of crisis that people in recovery sometimes refer to as hitting rock bottom. And things were in chaos. He felt that his life was collapsing all around him and he was losing it. It was chaotic and an out-of-control situation that I was terrified was going to escalate into something much worse. And despite my background in mental health and as a martial artist, at one point, things seemed to be spiraling out of control, and I was terrified that someone was going to get hurt. So I did something a little crazy. I stood in his kitchen in the middle of all this chaos, and I picked up his landline, and I dialed 911. I waited 5 seconds, and I put the phone down. I hung up. When my brother asked me what I'd done, I told him. And I told him that whether I had spoken to the cops or not, they would be here in a few minutes. So we all needed to calm down right now. By the time the police arrived, we mostly had. The situation was stable and safe, and we were able to send them away. Later that day, I went with my brother to his first NA meeting. It was a chance for me to witness the bravest thing that I've ever seen, a person entering into the recovery process by admitting that things were out of control and looking for his own greater power. It's been 13 years since then, and from that day to this, my brother has become one of my heroes. Not just because he chose life and all the pain that entailed for him, but because he continues to this day, 13 years later, to speak and bring the community of recovery to many, many others. And in his journey, he's found wisdom. More importantly, he somehow found a deep sense of love and caring that I can only aspire to. I learn from him every day. But that brings me to the second call that I received. It's from Mikey, and it was from jail. I met Mikey in about 1992 when he became my karate student. He was about 7 at the time. Over the years, he was one of the most gifted kids I'd ever trained. Several years into his training, after he had outlasted many students who started long before him, he became my senior student and my assistant. He studied and taught with me every Saturday for several years. Eventually, he would travel with me from class location to class location, and it became Senpai Mikey. I'm not sure if you know what that word means, but in karate, elder brother, senior student is senpai. He was a mentor to hundreds of other students. So it was no surprise that at age 17, he became the first of my students to earn a black belt, the first person I ever promoted. By then, he'd grown up into a young man, and he went to work at his other passion, which was cooking. He still attended classes periodically, but he struggled to find his adult place, to keep a job, and to cope with a family situation that was, at best, chaotic. We stayed in touch, but I'm sure you know life gets in the way sometimes. When he called me that day from jail, he said he needed bail. I helped. Later, when he called me and he said he needed a place to stay because his family had kicked him out, I tried to help. That call was the beginning of a roller coaster that lasted for years, and it ended with Mikey going to prison for some of the things that he'd done either while he was high or trying to get high. I learned some of the difficult truths about loving someone who's struggling with addiction, and there were many calls from prison. Eventually, the call came that said he was out and he was starting over, and he needed a ride to his new place. He sounded great. He looked great. He was full of dreams of returning to cooking, returning to karate, and, quote, getting his life back, unquote. On top of that, he wanted to use his experiences to talk to the other kids in my KidSafe classes, talk to my other students about combating drug addiction, his own particular version of Scared Straight. This was the old Mikey, the young man I'd loved and I missed while he was away. He rejoined me and my teaching partner, Erin, who had been his martial arts sister in Rahway 20 years before that. And once again, they began teaching classes together. When I talked about this service, Erin and I remembered this shared vision of Mikey riding to work from his apartment on a unicycle. Only Mikey. He had lost his driver's license and he couldn't drive, so why not ride a unicycle to work? With this enormous grin on his face. But less than a year later, I got the final call, the one where Erin told me that Mikey had overdosed and that he was gone. On one level, it was a shock because things seemed to be going so well. But on another level, it wasn't. I know now, and I knew then, that going so well can be a necessary illusion, and that someone who relapses during these good times is far more likely to suffer an overdose for a variety of reasons. So, every one of those 35 flags is Mikey to me. Every one of them is a story of life, of love, of someone desperately trying to connect to what's most important to them in life, but whose life has somehow ended in addiction. I believe that I've said in other reflections that a key part of being a Unitarian Universalist is to let go of the concept of sin and to reject the idea that we're somehow either sinners or saved, either fallen or fortunate, but instead to embrace our inherent worth and dignity as humans. I know, not just think, but know that there is nothing separating me as a person from those 35 flags. I could be them. They could be me. I've spent literally thousands of hours as a suicide hotline crisis counselor. I had to stop after I lost Mikey. I found that it was too painful. It was too hard to maintain the objectivity that I needed and the necessary separation between I and thou that Reverend Scott Alexander, a good friend of mine, a Unitarian minister, talks about. Although in spending all that time with people in crisis, I learned one more lesson that my brother and my surrogate son also taught me. Although I might have been a little close to it at the time to see it. There's nothing inherently different between those two stories, my brother's and Mikey's. Even though the eventual outcomes of both of these people that I love were very different. Those are both snapshots of the moment when one person's connection to another meant literally life and death. They were both the moment when the real connections between us become more important than our individual experiences. There's nothing more human than addiction. Nothing more human than seeking pleasure in order to avoid the pain of life. In the words of one of my clinical mentors, Harry Stack Sullivan, it's in these moments that we come to understand that we are all more simply human than otherwise. And it's in our shared humanity that we find the answers. Sorry, I forgot to do this before, but I'm going to do it right now. Anybody know what this is? If you do, bless you. If you don't, you're about to find out. This is naloxone. I've carried it, oops, sorry, so much for my affirmation. I've carried it with me every day since Mikey died. So does Aaron. It is the treatment for opioid overdose. Not the treatment, but it is the first aid. It can prevent death. It is part of what has lowered the statistics in New Jersey by 10% over the last few years. Distributing naloxone and making it freely available was passed into law a few years ago by Governor Murphy. You can go into any pharmacy in New Jersey and ask them for a naloxone kit. If you're over 14, they'll give it to you with no questions asked. I would highly recommend doing so. But I brought it here today not just as a public service announcement, but as a metaphor. And here's the gist of what I wanted to say today. Naloxone acts as an antagonist to opioids. It chemically neutralizes some of the processes that cause an overdose to be fatal. But behind the opioids is the sense of loneliness, anger, despair, and helplessness that both my brother and Mikey were expressing to me those days when they entered recovery. We are the antidote for loneliness, for helplessness, for the loss of identity that turns addiction into fatality. We are the antidote. We're not saviors. Mikey taught me that the hard way. We're not a rope or a ladder or a lifeboat. We're just an antagonist. What's the opposite of despair? Hope. What's the opposite of isolation? Belonging. What's the opposite of depression? Joy and gratitude. For the people in our lives, whether they're someone we say hello to casually at work, someone we live with, or someone we love deeply, we are the naloxone. And unlike naloxone, well, actually like it in a way, there's 2 doses in here. If you come upon someone suffering the symptoms of an overdose, you're supposed to administer 1, wait 3 minutes, and if it's not fully effective, administer the 2nd dose. So I guess we are a little like naloxone in that the antidote of community, of belonging, of family, of love needs to be administered over and over and over again. That's really the only answer we have. That's really the only thing that ever answers the question of why. So, aside from the whole 12-step process, I wanted to share with you today, this is my meeting. This is my community. This place is my naloxone. This is my greater power. It's the power of a congregation composed of flawed and imperfect humans who gather together with a mission. Our shared mission here is to explore spirituality, to engage community, and to change the world. As we explore spirituality, we constantly seek a higher purpose together. We know that the highest purpose we share is the knowledge that we become something greater when we commit to accepting one another in all of our humanity and also accepting each other's pain, like the candles and the stones. We know that our mission requires reaching out to our fellow humans without judgment and with love at the center of all we do. We engage in community by gathering here in a covenant that forges us together into a community of communities, a chain of connections that both binds us and frees us. Here we're children and families together, friends together, teachers and learners together, parents together, activists together, women together, men together, and Unitarian Universalists. It's an awkward name, but it certainly says what we are, Unitarian Universalists. Here we're united in our mission to explore spirituality as we discover our greater power through that web of connection. We're united in engaging community and creating covenants that bind us, but also allow us the forgiveness that's necessary to grow, even from our mistakes, to grow beyond simply avoiding pain towards a life of gratitude and service. And we're united in hope, a hope that somehow, through what we do here, we not only can transform ourselves, but potentially change the world. It's this knowledge that we join together to acknowledge our losses, but equally we join together to proclaim life in a never-ending dedication to finding our greatest power. Again, Scott Alexander, one of my favorite Unitarian Universalist ministers, said God is a verb. God is an action. The action of coming together, sharing what's most important, supporting one another, and hopefully, prayerfully, maybe, making sure we plant fewer flags next year. Thank you.